I was humiliated at a luxury car dealership. They didn't know who my husband was, and then I walked into the dealership on a Friday morning without any expectations, at least not beyond being treated like any other customer. Wearing an old pair of jeans and a plain gray t-shirt, I had my hair tied back and minimal makeup on. I didn't dress like someone who just sold a multi-million-dollar contract 2 weeks ago, or someone whose foundation had raised over $60 million for adaptive sports programs. I was just me, Nina, on a mission to find a birthday gift for my brother Leo. He'd spent the past year rebuilding his life after a near-fatal accident, learning how to walk again after doctors told him he'd never move without assistance. For his 45th birthday, I wanted to get him something outrageous, something loud, something that would remind him he didn't just survive. He came back stronger. The second I stepped through the glass doors of Lux Auto House in Charleston, I knew exactly which car I wanted. It was a midnight graphite GT coupe on the central platform, its deep metallic finish catching the light just right. It looked fast standing still. It looked like Leo. Before I could even get within 10 feet of it, a man in a navy suit intercepted me like I'd tripped a security sensor. "Can I help you?" he asked, though his tone suggested he hoped I'd say no. "I'm here to look at the Azure coupe," I replied, nodding toward the car behind him. He looked me over with all the subtlety of a TSA agent searching a suspicious carry-on. His eyes moved from my sneakers to my loose ponytail, then stopped at my expression, which I tried to keep neutral. "That model," he said with a tight smile that never touched his eyes, "is part of a limited run. Only 20 made this year. It's not available for casual viewing. We generally show that one by appointment only to qualified buyers." Qualified buyers. That one stung more than I wanted it to. I glanced around the showroom. Polished floors, champagne bar in the corner, muted jazz playing through invisible speakers. I could see two salesmen snickering behind a wall of display glass, one of them nudging the other as if I were some sort of punchline. "I was hoping to learn more about the interior," I said, still calm, still pretending this was normal. Another man appeared beside us, younger, clearly newer. His name tag read Jarrett. He smiled with the kind of awkward sincerity that made me immediately like him. "I'd be happy to walk you through it," he said, before the older one, Travis, as his tag confirmed, cut him off. "No need, Jared," Travis said smoothly. "Why don't you grab a brochure for our guest? I'll handle this." And just like that, I was dismissed again. The real kicker came when a couple walked in, both dressed in expensive designer wear, the kind of people who looked like they stepped out of a catalog. Travis lit up like a Christmas tree. He didn't even excuse himself from our conversation. He just turned and walked toward them, arms outstretched. "Mr. and Mrs. Walton, welcome back," he gushed, leading them right to the Azure. The very same car he just told me wasn't available for casual viewing. Jared approached me again, quieter this time, clearly embarrassed by what had just happened. "I'm really sorry about that," he said, fiddling with the hem of his too long sleeve. "Would you still like to hear about the Azure?" I smiled at him. "Sure. Why not?" While Jared described the engine specs, safety features, and the unique trim options, I watched Travis open the door of the coupe for Mrs. Walton and let her sit inside. The same car that had supposedly been off-limits to me just minutes earlier. It was no longer about the car. I'd been underestimated plenty of times in my life. Dismissed in meetings, second-guessed in boardrooms, questioned in interviews. But something about this moment settled like gravel in my chest. Travis glanced over at me once and offered a thin-lipped smile before whispering something to Mr. Walton, who laughed in response. I thanked Jared for his time, told him not to worry, and started walking toward the exit. Just as I reached the door, I heard Travis mutter, "Some people just don't know their place." He didn't even try to whisper it. Outside, the morning sun stung my eyes. I pulled out my phone and stood there for a second, breathing deeply to push down the rising heat in my chest. I wasn't mad for myself. I'd learned long ago that how people treat me based on my appearance says more about them than it ever could about me. But I kept thinking about all the people who don't get the benefit of walking away knowing they could have bought the whole damn dealership. There was a part of me that wanted to let it go, buy the car elsewhere, and chalk it up to yet another predictable case of retail arrogance. But something stopped me. Maybe it was the look on Jared's face when he realized what had happened, or maybe it was the memory of my brother dragging himself upstairs just months ago, refusing to give up. I hit call on my husband's contact. "Hey," I said when he picked up. "What's wrong?" he asked immediately. He always knew. "Nothing I haven't seen before," I said, swallowing a bitter laugh. "But I think I need your help with something." By the time I got home, he already had a notebook open, his laptop to the side, and that calculating look in his eyes that usually meant a tech company was about to go bankrupt. Cameron didn't get mad. He got even, but always with precision, never with ego. He was one of those rare men who could dismantle someone's career with a polite email and a donation to their competitor. I told him everything, from the moment I walked in to the last smug look Travis gave me. He didn't interrupt. He just nodded slowly, like he was assembling something in his mind. "So," he said finally, "what would you like to do?" "I don't want revenge," I replied honestly. "I want awareness. But I'm also not going to pretend it didn't happen." He nodded again, thoughtful. "Then let's make them see it." And that was all we needed to get started. The next morning started with sunlight pouring through the kitchen windows while I stared into a mug of coffee that had long gone cold. Cameron was already dressed, his black shirt rolled at the sleeves, blazer thrown over a chair, calm as ever. He had this unsettling ability to turn fury into logic, into action, and never let it leak onto his face. I loved that about him, and sometimes it scared me just a little. We hadn't spoken much after our conversation the previous night. He had listened, taken in every detail, and when I finished talking, all he'd said was, "I'll take care of it." I knew that look. He wasn't angry, but something in him had been triggered. Cameron was protective in the quietest way possible, but when something crossed a line, especially involving me, he didn't shout or curse. He just became surgical, precise. "You're sure you don't want to come with me?" he asked while finishing the last button on his sleeve. "No," I said, finally taking a sip of lukewarm coffee. "This isn't about me being there to see it. It's about them learning the lesson on their own." He nodded, adjusted his cuff, then picked up his phone and keys. "I won't say much," he promised. "Just enough to shift the ground under their feet." He left the house in silence, but I knew the message would be deafening. The car he took was one of his lesser-seen machines, an obsidian black Rolls-Royce Wraith with a custom two-tone trim, one of only a handful built to that exact spec. It wasn't flashy in the way most people thought wealth should be. It was powerful, rare, and quietly terrifying if you knew what you were looking at. By 10 a.m., he was pulling up to Lux Auto House with the kind of precision I knew would already be causing a stir. That car didn't just arrive. It made the building around it seem irrelevant. Through the dealership's floor-to-ceiling windows, Cameron saw Travis walking toward the door like a man who had just smelled fresh blood. I could imagine it all clearly from the quiet of our kitchen, his practiced stride, the forced smile he reserved for clients he assumed were worth his time, his hand already extended before he even knew the man's name. From the updates I got later from Cameron and, interestingly enough, from Jared, who sent me a long apologetic email that evening, it went down almost exactly how I pictured it. Travis greeted Cameron like royalty. "Good morning, sir. Welcome to Lux Auto House. My name is Travis. I'm the sales manager here. What can we help you with today?" Cameron shook his hand briefly, coolly, then let his eyes wander across the cars without answering immediately. That silence alone probably made Travis nervous. "I'm looking for a specific vehicle," Cameron said, finally letting his gaze fall on the midnight GT coupe still displayed on the central platform. Travis lit up, clearly believing this was his moment. "Excellent choice," he gushed. "That model's been turning heads all week. We only received one unit. Extremely rare. Would you like to see the interior? We can bring over a glass of wine while we chat about options." Cameron raised one hand. "I know where the car is," he said, not unkindly, but firm enough to quiet the whole exchange. "My wife came here yesterday to see it. You told her it was appointment only." According to Jared, the silence that followed could have been carved in stone. Travis's face faltered. He blinked twice. Said nothing. "My wife, Nina," Cameron added, his tone as flat as slate. She wore jeans and a t-shirt. I believe you suggested she check out the used inventory across town. Behind him, Jared apparently let out an audible breath. Sir, if there was any misunderstanding. There wasn't, Cameron replied, his eyes scanning the interior of the dealership. You were very clear. She wasn't dressed to be taken seriously, so you dismissed her. At that point, the owner of the dealership finally appeared, Miles, in his usual too expensive blazer, an expression that tried to pretend he hadn't been watching from his office window the entire time. Good morning, Miles said, already smoothing his voice into customer service mode. Is there an issue here? Cameron turned to face him, calm and controlled. Only that your staff made assumptions based on my wife's appearance. She came here prepared to make a purchase in full. She was treated like a problem to be moved along. From what I heard, Miles stammered, offered a semi-apology, something about exclusivity and standards. He tried to pivot, probably hoping to salvage the sale. Then Cameron dropped the real weight. She was going to buy that GT coupe as a gift for her brother's birthday. I was also prepared to replace our foundation's fleet, 10 vehicles, all luxury hybrids. That's in addition to 3 new cars I'd planned to add to our home collection this year. Jared told me. Travis went pale. The man actually took a half step backward like the numbers had knocked the air out of his lungs. I'm not sure Lux Auto House is the place for those transactions anymore, Cameron said. And then, he added the one line that set everything into motion. But I'm open to the idea of a second chance, if that includes education, not just profit. That's when the conversation turned. Cameron explained he didn't want gifts or discounts. He didn't even want an apology that didn't come from a place of understanding. He wanted Travis, personally, to come volunteer at the next benefit event hosted by my nonprofit. You're inviting me as a guest? Travis asked, confused. No, Cameron replied. As staff. It wasn't said cruelly, just plainly. Like gravity. You'll be helping escort guests, managing the event flow, and assisting with our adaptive sports showcase. You'll be working directly with the people we support, people who are judged before they speak, every single day. Miles nodded quickly, eager to comply. Travis mumbled agreement, unsure if he had any other choice. Cameron turned to Jared and, without missing a beat, said, I'd like you to handle the paperwork for the GT Coupe. From now on, you're our point of contact. Jared's message to me that night was a mix of gratitude, disbelief, and an apology for not stepping in when he saw how I was treated. I told him what I honestly believed. He had shown decency when the moment called for it. That's all anyone can really do. The car was paid for the following day. Leo would have his birthday surprise. The dealership would think twice before qualifying customers based on appearances. And Travis? He had no idea yet how deeply that lesson was about to change him. I didn't go to the dealership that morning, but every detail of what happened reached me by that afternoon. Cameron was never one to exaggerate, and he didn't need to with this one. Everything unfolded with the exact kind of precision that he's known for. He told me later he hadn't raised his voice once, and he hadn't needed to. Apparently, just stating the facts in front of the right people was enough to make the entire place freeze. The dealership didn't just fall quiet. It reportedly fell into a kind of suspended disbelief, like they were watching a house of cards collapse in slow motion. According to Jared, who sent me a voice note after his shift ended, even the receptionist stopped typing when Cameron brought up my name and said he was my husband. She was across the room, and she still caught every word. I wasn't sitting there eating popcorn, but I won't lie. There was some satisfaction in knowing the illusion shattered so completely. What people expect wealth to look like is still locked in some outdated fantasy of designer shoes, loud jewelry, and $100 blowout every morning. The reality is often far quieter. I choose to live in clothes that let me breathe. I choose to drive my foundation's initiatives instead of drawing attention to myself. And the moment someone assumes I have no value because I don't present like a trophy wife, I know exactly what I'm dealing with. After Cameron's visit, things moved fast. That same evening, I received an email directly from the dealership owner, Miles. It wasn't short. He apologized for what had happened, and to his credit, didn't make excuses. He acknowledged that I had been treated unfairly, admitted that assumptions had been made, and then requested a call to discuss a possible path forward. I wasn't sure I wanted to pick up the phone, but Cameron encouraged me to listen, not for their sake, but for the sake of the bigger picture we cared about. He reminded me that sometimes the best change happens not because someone's heart suddenly grows 3 sizes, but because they're forced to confront the fallout of their behavior in a way they can't ignore. So I replied. I told Miles that any path forward would have to include a commitment to actual education and internal change, not just a convenient PR spin. And that's when we proposed the idea of including Travis in our upcoming adaptive sports gala, not as a donor, not as a sponsor, but as hands-on staff. To my surprise, Miles agreed immediately. He didn't just say yes. He offered to volunteer himself and asked if there were others on his team who could join. I didn't expect that. I don't know if it was guilt, a genuine desire to do better, or just fear of losing what could have been the dealership's biggest sale of the year, but it didn't really matter. I had what I needed, follow-through. The gala was set for 2 weeks out. We were hosting it at a lakeside resort near Athens, Georgia. It was an annual fundraiser, but this year we were focused on a new initiative, an adaptive basketball complex we'd been developing for almost 3 years. Our team had spent months organizing the program, coordinating guest lists, arranging accommodations for families, and building a stage schedule that ran like clockwork. A week before the event, I got the finalized list of volunteers. Travis was on it. I didn't tell anyone to go easy on him. By the time the day arrived, the resort had transformed into a mosaic of color, music, movement, and possibility. Kids in wheelchairs zoomed across the polished courts. Volunteers scrambled to organize raffle items. Our adaptive dancers rehearsed one last time behind the main hall. The energy was electric, grounded in years of heartbreak, resilience, and the refusal to be told you can't. Travis arrived early, earlier than I expected. I spotted him near the guest entrance, wearing a basic staff polo and khakis, no expensive watch on his wrist, no Bluetooth headset clipped to his ear. He looked different, less polished, but more human. He was organizing signage when I approached. He turned when I said his name. For a moment, I saw a panic flicker in his eyes, like he wasn't sure whether I was going to smile or tear into him in front of everyone. I wasn't sure you'd show up, I said. My voice wasn't cold. It wasn't warm either. Just honest. I almost didn't, he replied, then hesitated. But I knew I needed to. We stood there for a moment, surrounded by laughter and chatter and the squeak of rubber wheels on gym flooring. Look, I know I already signed that letter Miles sent, but I wanted to say it myself, he added. I'm sorry. There's no excuse for how I treated you. I judged you based on absolutely nothing and made you feel like you didn't belong. That was wrong. I've been thinking about it every day since. His face had none of the smug confidence I remembered. There wasn't a trace of performative charm. He was uncomfortable, but not defensive, just stripped of the layers that usually protected him. I nodded slowly. Thank you for saying that. I've heard a lot of apologies in my life. Most of them mean very little. But showing up here? That counts more than you think. He nodded back, his expression unreadable. Then a kid in a red jersey rolled over and tugged at his arm. Mr. Travis, can you come rebound for me again? I almost got the shot last time. Travis looked down and smiled. Of course, buddy. Let's try again. He jogged after the kid without another word, and I watched him disappear into a crowd of volunteers and families. Later that night, as the evening portion of the gala kicked off and the lights dimmed over the stage, I caught a glimpse of Travis again. He was helping a girl adjust her leg brace before she went on stage for a dance number. His voice was low, his hands careful, and he stayed kneeling next to her until she smiled and nodded that she was ready. After the performance, I felt Cameron's hand slip into mine. He leaned over and whispered, "He's not the same guy anymore." I wanted to disagree. I wanted to say that people don't change that quickly. But I had watched Travis all day, quietly moving chairs, calming nervous kids, picking up trash no one asked him to handle. He wasn't playing a role anymore. He was doing the work. That doesn't undo what happened, but it's a start. And for the first time since I stepped foot in that dealership, I finally felt like something real had shifted. 3 weeks after the gala, I received a carefully worded email from Miles, the dealership owner who, to his credit, had at least attempted to address the wreckage left behind by his sales manager's arrogance. The message started with pleasantries, then slid into a tone that aimed to sound humble, although still slightly stiff, like he wasn't quite sure if he was speaking to a donor, a customer, or someone holding a detonator. He wrote that he was reaching out not to ask for business, but to express appreciation. According to him, the experience had been eye-opening for his staff and a wake-up call for internal practices. He added that Travis had continued volunteering at the Foundation's events, even after the mandatory shift was over, which caught me off guard. I hadn't expected that. I assumed he'd fulfill his obligation, shake a few hands, put on a show for the sake of optics, and then disappear into whatever luxury lounge he normally floated through. But apparently, he didn't just stay involved. He changed gears entirely. Jared confirmed it during one of our follow-up calls. He mentioned that Travis had stepped down from his managerial role 2 weeks after the gala, citing that he wanted to realign his priorities. That was the exact phrase. Realign his priorities. It sounded like a PR line until I heard what he'd done next. He had taken a part-time position coordinating mobility programs for teens in Charleston, pairing with an after-school initiative we'd helped fund 2 years ago. He wasn't being paid much, and Jared even said he'd heard from another staff member that Travis was using his own savings to help fund transportation for kids who needed wheelchair-accessible vans. I didn't know what to make of it at first. Was this guilt pushing him into a complete transformation, or had something really cracked open in him that night at the gala? I saw him again one afternoon when I visited our foundation's new adaptive training center on the north side of the city. He was wearing the same volunteer uniform as everyone else. No custom tailoring, no designer accents. Just khakis and a simple polo shirt with our logo embroidered across the chest. He didn't notice me at first. He was helping a boy adjust the chest strap on a rugby wheelchair, gently tightening the buckle and giving encouragement like he'd been doing it for years. I watched them for a few moments from the doorway before walking in. When he finally noticed me, he stood up and offered a small, genuine smile. Not the performative kind I remembered from the dealership, but the kind people use when they're trying to say thank you without words. "I didn't think I'd see you here," he said, rubbing his hands together like he didn't quite know what to do with them. "I was in the area," I replied, shrugging like it wasn't anything significant. "Wanted to see how things were going." "They're going," he said with a quiet chuckle. "Better than I deserve, honestly." I tilted my head slightly, watching him. "You're still here. That says something." "I thought about walking away," he admitted, eyes settling on the row of kids running basketball drills in modified wheelchairs. "But then Thomas, he's the kid with the little red gloves. He asked me if I'd be coming back next week. And when I hesitated, he looked at me like I'd already let him down." He paused, then added, "It messed me up more than I expected. So I came back. And then I kept coming back." We stood in silence for a minute, just listening to the sound of sneakers squeaking and laughter bouncing off the gym walls. "I used to think I was better than other people," Travis said quietly, not looking at me this time. "I didn't even realize I thought that. It wasn't conscious, you know? I just assumed that if someone didn't look the part, they didn't belong in certain spaces. I thought I was efficient, professional, discerning. What I really was arrogant." I didn't rush to respond. I wanted to hear everything he was willing to say. "And then you came in that day," he continued, finally turning toward me. "And I treated you like you weren't worth my time, like you were an inconvenience. And I've been trying to unpack that every day since." "You don't need to confess anything to me," I said softly. "I'm not the one who needs to forgive you." He nodded. "I know, but I still want you to hear it. I want you to understand that I'm trying to be better, not for points, not for performance, just because I saw what I was. And I didn't like it." I believed him, not because he was saying the right words. Anyone can fake remorse when it's convenient. I believed him because he didn't rush to fix it, didn't expect redemption to be granted like a certificate. He was just standing there, awkward and exposed, showing up week after week to carry gear, fold towels, and tie the shoelaces of kids who barely noticed who he used to be. Before I left that day, he asked if I had any advice. "Don't disappear when it gets hard," I said. "That's what most people do. They try once, get uncomfortable, and retreat into whatever version of themselves they're used to. But the good stuff, the real change, only happens after you stick around long enough to feel all of it. He didn't say anything right away, but I saw something shift in his face. Maybe it was relief. Maybe it was resolve. The next morning, Cameron handed me his phone with a smile on his face I hadn't seen in a while. "You'll want to read this," he said, handing it over like it was a rare gem. It was a text from Jared. He wrote that Travis had officially registered for a year-long mentorship program to support kids transitioning out of rehab into community sports. And on top of that, he'd begun working with Miles to revise the dealership's entire customer service policy, eliminating so-called qualifying assessments and requiring unconscious bias training for every employee, including management. But the line that stayed with me came at the end of Jared's message. He told me the thing he's most proud of lately. It read, "Isn't selling a car. It's earning back the trust of a kid who used to flinch every time an adult came too close." That was when I realized the shift wasn't temporary. The lesson had landed, and this time it stuck. The final thread unraveled quietly, without any dramatic announcement or social media blast. That's what made it feel so much more meaningful. It didn't end in a grand speech or a final confrontation, just a series of moments that added up to something much larger than I ever expected when I first walked into that dealership wearing jeans and a t-shirt. About 2 months after Travis started volunteering full-time at the center, I got a call from Cameron while I was going through grant applications in my office. He sounded amused, but also a little impressed, two tones he rarely used in the same breath. "You're not going to believe this," he said. "Miles is trying to schedule a sit-down. He wants to talk about revisiting the fleet deal." That fleet deal had been a potential $1 million contract, 10 vehicles meant to support our regional programs across 4 states. Cameron had paused that transaction when Travis dismissed me. We hadn't discussed reopening it since. "Did he say why now?" I asked, already guessing the answer. "He said he's been watching Travis and Jared," Cameron replied. "Apparently, they've rewritten the internal training manual from scratch. They've built a client relations program that's being modeled in 2 other dealerships. And Miles says Travis has personally closed 3 major contracts with organizations that specifically asked for a low-profile buying experience. Clients who said they were tired of being sized up the moment they walked through the door." I sat back in my chair, stunned by how far we'd come from that moment in the showroom when Travis had gestured toward the exit like I didn't even belong in the building. "Do you want to take the meeting?" Cameron asked, leaving the decision entirely in my hands. I hesitated, not out of spite, but because I needed to make sure the choice was about what mattered, not about proving a point. In the end, I said yes. Not because they'd earned my business back, but because they were working to earn something much more important, accountability. We scheduled the meeting for the following week. I asked that Jared be the lead contact on the paperwork, and that Travis be invited to sit in as part of the team, not because I wanted to test him, but because I wanted him to witness what mutual respect looked like in a room where nobody had the upper hand. When we arrived at the dealership, the atmosphere had shifted noticeably. The staff were polite, yes, but also present. They didn't look through people like glass or speak in carefully disguised dismissals. There were fewer suits and more eyes that met yours when you entered. Jared greeted us warmly, paperwork in hand, and escorted us to a private office where everything had been prearranged. Travis was already there, seated quietly, no longer projecting authority, just listening. He stood as we entered and extended his hand. "Thanks for coming," he said, his voice steady but not rehearsed. "I know it's not owed, and I'm grateful you're giving us the chance to rebuild trust." I shook his hand without hesitation. "I'm not here to settle a score," I said plainly. "I'm here to make sure the work that's been done doesn't go unnoticed." That kind of change deserves a conversation. What followed was one of the most seamless meetings I've ever had with a business. Every request was anticipated. Every document was ready. Jared handled each question with clarity, professionalism, and not a hint of arrogance. Travis spoke only when necessary, never taking over, never trying to reclaim some lost pride. When it came time to sign the deal, Cameron slid the final page toward me, pausing just long enough to give me a look that said, "This is your call." And I signed it. 10 vehicles. Custom configurations. Long-term service contract. Everything we'd originally planned. Miles joined us briefly at the end of the meeting. He didn't offer any excuses, only a handshake and a promise to continue supporting our foundation through both financial backing and staff participation. He even asked if we'd consider letting them host one of our upcoming adaptive driving workshops on their lot, with full access to their techs and vehicles. We agreed, under one condition, that the event be organized by the same team that built our trust back. Jared and Travis both nodded. A month later, that workshop took place on a bright Saturday morning, with banners from the foundation flapping in the warm breeze outside Lux Auto House. Dozens of families showed up. Mechanics stood beside instructors, guiding teens through vehicle modifications, showing them how to handle adaptive controls, and letting them test drive cars in a private, secured lot behind the building. And Travis? He spent the entire afternoon guiding a girl named Evie through the basics of her first modified driving lesson. She was 14, born with limited motor function in her legs, and she had once been told by a teacher that she'd never be independent enough to drive. Travis knelt beside her as she took the wheel, explaining how the controls worked and adjusting the seat so she felt secure. He never looked rushed, never distracted, and when she made a smooth turn without panicking, he gave her a high five that made her grin so wide. I saw her mom tear up from across the lot. Later, as the event wrapped up, I found myself standing near Travis while volunteers packed up equipment. "She did great today," I said, nodding toward Evie as she showed off her new learner's permit to her older brother. "She's going to be better than most adults on the road within 6 months," he replied with a laugh. I could see her confidence go up with every turn. There was a pause before he added, "I think I finally understand what it is you do." I glanced at him, curious. "You don't just provide access," he said. "You rewrite what people believe is possible." It was the most honest thing he'd ever said to me. We didn't hug. We didn't exchange some overly symbolic gesture. We just stood there, watching families load into their cars, some for the first time driving themselves without assistance, and knew something real had shifted. As the sun started to drop below the rooftops, casting long shadows over the pavement, Cameron wrapped an arm around my shoulder. "You know," he said, "I used to think that story would just end with a canceled sale and a bitter lesson." "It almost did," I replied. "But now," he asked. "Now it ends with someone becoming the person they were supposed to be," I said. "And with a lot of kids who no longer feel invisible. That's what made it worth it. Not the car, not the contract, not even the apology. What mattered most was that a room full of strangers had learned that kindness can't be measured by a suit, and potential doesn't wear labels. Sometimes, the most powerful change doesn't happen with noise. It happens in silence, when someone decides to stay, to do better, and to keep showing up when it matters most."